On Monday morning, August 8, 2005, a bank employee in Brazil opened the vault and found $70 million gone. No alarm had rung. Not one. The cameras showed nothing. The locks were untouched. The steel door was sealed, exactly as it had been on Friday afternoon. For a few long minutes, the staff of the Central Bank of Brazil in the city of Fortaleza stood inside a room that made no sense. The money was not misplaced. It was not miscounted. It was gone. 3.5 tons of cash had vanished from one of the most secure buildings in the country over a single quiet weekend. And then someone looked down. In the corner of the vault floor, there was a hole, about 2 feet wide, cut clean through more than a meter of steel-reinforced concrete, a hole that dropped into darkness and kept going. What investigators found at the bottom of that hole would turn this into the largest bank burglary in Brazil's history, and one of the biggest the world has ever seen. Because this was not a robbery. Nobody pulled a gun. Nobody spoke to a teller. Nobody even entered through a door. This was something far more patient. And to understand what the police were staring at, you have to go back 3 months to a quiet little house 1 block away and a company that sold grass. In the months before the heist, a group of men rented a modest house in the center of Fortaleza, a coastal city of more than 2 million people in northeastern Brazil. The house sat roughly 80 meters from the regional headquarters of the Banco Central, the central bank of Brazil. The men put up a sign. They handed out business cards. They told the neighbors they ran a landscaping company selling natural and synthetic grass. Now stop and think about that cover story for a second. Why grass? Because a landscaping business has the perfect excuse for the one thing a tunnel can never hide: dirt. Every day, vehicles left that little house loaded with soil, and nobody on the street blinked twice. Of course they are hauling dirt. They sell grass. Neighbors later described the men as polite, quiet, professional. They kept normal business hours and waved hello. Only one small detail seemed odd, and nobody thought much of it at the time. For a gardening company, they never seemed to sell any grass. How long would it take you to notice that the gardeners next door never had a single customer? Underneath that house, one of the most sophisticated criminal engineering projects ever discovered was advancing a few feet at a time. The tunnel stretched nearly 80 meters, longer than 3 tennis courts laid end to end. It ran about 4 meters below the surface, passing under streets, under traffic, under the feet of thousands of people who had no idea what was moving beneath them. And this was no crawl space scraped out with shovels and luck. When investigators finally walked through it, they found wooden supports holding up the ceiling, plastic lining to keep out moisture, electric lights running the full length of the passage, even a ventilation system pushing breathable air to the men working at the front. Brazilian federal police said the construction showed the hands of people with serious knowledge of engineering and excavation, and that the diggers had likely used GPS coordinates to keep the tunnel on course. Because here is the problem with digging blind through 80 meters of earth. If your math is off by a single degree, you do not come up inside a vault. You come up in the middle of an avenue. These men surfaced within centimeters of their target. But the tunnel, as remarkable as it was not the smartest part of this plan. The smartest part was what they chose to steal. Inside the vault of the central bank in Fortaleza, there was more than one kind of money. There was new currency, crisp, clean bills with sequential serial numbers, logged in federal records, traceable from the moment they entered the world. And then there were the used notes, worn bills pulled out of circulation from banks across the region, shipped to the central bank to be examined, sorted, and eventually destroyed or sent back out. Old 50-real notes, wrinkled, ordinary, anonymous. And here is the detail that turns a crime into a masterpiece. Those used bills were not registered by serial number. There was no list, no record, no way to flag them, and no way to trace them. So the thieves ignored everything else in that vault. They took only the used 50s, 164.7 million Brazilian reais. At that week's exchange rate, roughly 70 million US dollars, in completely untraceable paper. Why does that single choice matter so much? Because most thieves are not caught when they steal money. They are caught when they spend it. These men had just stolen money that, on paper, did not exist. Sometime over the weekend of August 6th and 7th, 2005, the crew broke through the final barrier. 1.1 meters of concrete, reinforced with steel, the floor of the vault itself. And the question that haunted the bank for years afterward is the one you are probably asking right now. How do you cut through the floor of a central bank vault without a single alarm going off? The uncomfortable answer investigators arrived at was this. The vault's security was designed to stop people from coming through the doors. The doors were sealed. The doors were monitored. The doors were watched. The floor was not. There were no motion sensors inside the vault chamber itself. The bank had built a fortress, and the fortress was looking in the wrong direction. So, the thieves climbed up into a silent room stacked with cash, and they got to work. Now, picture the physical problem they face next. $70 million in 50 real notes is not a duffel bag of money. It is around 3.5 tons of paper, the weight of 2 cars. Every kilo of it had to be packed, lowered through a 2-foot hole, and hauled 80 meters back through a tunnel, load after load after load, in the dark, against the clock. They did it. By the end of that weekend, the vault was lighter by 3.5 tons. The tunnel was empty, and the friendly little grass company 1 block away had quietly gone out of business forever. Monday morning, the discovery. Within hours, Brazil's federal police launched what would become one of the largest criminal investigations in the country's history. They sealed the tunnel. They photographed the lights, the supports, the ventilation. And they understood immediately what they were up against. A crew that had planned for everything. The house had been rented with paperwork that led nowhere. The neighbors could describe faces, but faces without names are shadows. For the first days, the police had a $70 million crime scene and almost nothing to hold on to. Then came the break. And it was exactly the kind of break you would expect if you were paying attention earlier. Remember how thieves actually get caught? Not when they steal. When they spend. In the days after the burglary, a group of men walked into a car dealership and paid for 10 brand new vehicles. In cash. Stacks and stacks of used 50 real notes. Purchases like that do not stay quiet. Within weeks, police stopped a pickup truck and found more than 5 million reais hidden inside it. Arrests followed. Then more arrests. The crew that had spent 3 months being invisible was being undone. One spending spree at a time. But the police were not the only ones hunting these men. And this is the part of the story that nobody saw coming. When word spread through Brazil's criminal underworld that a handful of men were sitting on 70 million untraceable dollars, something changed. Those men stopped being criminals. They became prey. In October 2005, barely 2 months after the heist, a man named Luis Fernando Ribeiro, described by investigators as one of the suspected masterminds of the operation, was kidnapped, not by the police, by other criminals. His captors demanded a ransom from his family. The family paid nearly 900,000 reais. It did not save him. Days later, his body was found on a country road. He had been shot. The man who helped defeat one of the most secure vaults in South America was killed by the very fortune he pulled out of it. And he was not the only one. In the years that followed, members of the crew and even their relatives were hunted, kidnapped, and ransomed by rival criminals chasing the same buried money. Let that sink in for a moment. The bank's alarm never rang. But the money itself became an alarm, one that called out to every predator in the country, and it never stopped ringing. Over the following years, federal police arrested dozens of people connected to the tunnel. Cash turned up hidden in walls, buried in yards, stuffed into vehicles, scattered across multiple states. And yet, here is the final number that keeps this case alive 2 decades later. Of the 164 million Rs that went down that hole, only around 20 million was ever recovered. Barely more than 10%. The rest is still out there, spent, laundered, buried, or lost. To this day, no one can fully account for it. So what do you do with a story like this? You probably do not own a vault. You will probably never worry about a tunnel. But you trust systems every single day that are built exactly like that one. Your accounts have doors, and you call them passwords. Your apps have alarms, and you call them notifications. And just like the Central Bank of Fortaleza, almost all of that security is watching the front door. It is listening for noise, for force, for something breaking. Meanwhile, the most dangerous attacks in your life will never be loud. The email that looks one letter off. The friendly business that politely sets up next to your trust and hauls a little dirt out every single day. Patience is the one weapon your alarms were never designed to hear. That bank was not beaten by force. It was beaten by 3 months of silence. And the men who beat it were not destroyed by the police. They were destroyed by what they were carrying. There is a strange kind of justice in that. Security systems can fail you. Greed never does. On Monday morning, August 8, 2005, a bank employee in Brazil opened the vault and no alarm had ever rung. But for the men at the other end of that tunnel, an alarm had just started ringing. One with no off switch, one that would chase them through arrests, kidnappings, betrayals, and roadside graves for years. $70 million went into the dark, and the dark sent back a bill. But here is what should really keep you up at night. This crew needed 3 months, 80 meters of earth, and an engineering team to empty one vault. A single man once emptied an entire bank, a bank that had survived 233 years, financed empires, and served a queen. He did it without a tunnel, without a mask, and without breaking a single lock. All he needed was a desk in Singapore and one secret 5-digit account. That story is next.